Picture this. You wake up tomorrow, walk out your front door, and just keep walking. Through your neighborhood, out of your city, across what used to be a national frontier. You could keep walking all the way to another continent if you felt like it. There are no checkpoints to stop you, no armed guards waving you through, and no lines to stand in. Passports become instantly obsolete. There are no visas to apply for and no stamps to collect because there's nothing left to track your physical movement. You don't need a customs form, no official cares about your occupation or your point of embarkation. The purpose of Visit Box ceases to exist. Depending on where you happen to live, this scenario might sound like absolute freedom or complete chaos. But this specific condition has been modeled by economists and debated by philosophers for centuries. By imagining a world where we completely erase every line on the map, we are forced to see the quiet, invisible work those borders are doing every single day. Before we tear borders down, we have to look at what we're actually dismantling. The hard, guarded line on a map is a surprisingly recent human invention. For most of human history, large societies didn't have strict borders. Ancient empires had frontiers, fuzzy zones of influence, and shifting allegiances that faded gradually outward from a capital city. The modern concept solidified in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia. That was the moment sovereignty started meaning a government has total, exclusive authority within a clearly defined, drawn box. Over the next few centuries, that specific geographic idea was exported across the globe, accelerated by colonialism and then again by decolonization in the 20th century. Today, a border is a complex membrane defining who collects taxes, enforces the law, shapes civic identity, and controls capital. Civilization has quietly run on this constraint for centuries. Delete the legal line, and the entire system loses its anchor. Building a truly borderless world requires rebooting the basic mechanical functions of global society from scratch. The most immediate consequence of dropping every border is legal. The distinction between citizen and immigrant collapses. Anyone can move anywhere, at any time, for any reason. Migration patterns would shift rapidly. Researchers studying open border scenarios have modeled that if labor could move completely freely, global GDP could roughly double. Economists explain this using the place premium. A massive portion of income isn't dictated by individual skill, but simply by the economy you are standing in. An engineer relocating to a hub with better infrastructure could see their pay multiply by 10. We have spent decades aggressively pursuing the free trade of physical goods, yet a huge amount of human capital remains economically trapped by geography. For businesses, a borderless world removes the friction of work visas, corporate sponsorships, and immigration bureaucracy. Companies suddenly have direct access to a genuinely global talent pool. On a human level, diaspora communities and families split apart by immigration law could reunite immediately without waiting years for a government to process their paperwork. Cities would experience an intense acceleration of cultural cross-pollination. We would see the rapid emergence of hyper-dense innovation clusters, drawing talent from every corner of the planet. From a pure macroeconomic perspective, total global mobility represents the largest single expansion of theoretical global wealth ever modeled. Every theoretical gain in labor productivity requires the physical movement of a human being who occupies space. While labor can move instantly, cities cannot be built instantly. The world's wealthiest cities could face a sudden, unpredictable influx of hundreds of millions of people over a very short span of time. Local public utilities would face immediate pressure. Water systems, hospitals, public transit, and schools are budgeted and constructed for slow, stable population growth. They cannot be conjured out of thin air to meet a massive overnight surge in demand. This chart shows exactly what happens to housing. A sharply spiking population demand instantly crosses a relatively flat housing supply line, driving localized living costs to impossible highs. There is also serious debate among economists about what happens to wages for native-born workers. An immediate, massive influx of easily substitutable labor into a specific area could put severe downward pressure on wages for local, lower-skilled workers. Unplanned, rapid population shifts would also place intense ecological strain on regions with fragile ecosystems, limited fresh water, or delicate agricultural balances. A totally borderless world optimizes global wealth on paper, but it ignores the physical speed limits of human infrastructure, risking severe localized failures. There's another major blind spot in this thought experiment. Erasing national borders doesn't erase local governments. Someone still has to fund the roads, the police, and the streetlights. When citizens can move with zero legal friction between different regions, tax competition goes into overdrive, creating a massive free rider problem. Wealthy taxpayers have no incentive to stay in a high-tax jurisdiction. They can instantly relocate to a neighboring low-tax zone. Those same residents could then commute to utilize the high-tax infrastructure, effectively hollowing out the municipal tax base for whoever is left. Currency systems would face a similar cascading failure. Without national boundaries to support weaker fiat systems, people would naturally gravitate toward a handful of dominant global currencies, threatening the survival of local banking systems. Without geographic checkpoints, security and public health face huge logistical hurdles. Tracking disease outbreaks and enforcing quarantines becomes nearly impossible. The legal framework dissolves right alongside it. If a suspect can simply walk into another region, traditional concepts of police jurisdiction, cross-border crime, and extradition lose their foundation. Even basic political representation gets murky. Democratic voting relies on fixed geographic electorates. If the population constantly shifts, deciding who gets to vote in a local election becomes a moving target. The social contracts that provide public health care, pensions, and law enforcement strictly rely on a stable, bounded, and trackable community to function. We don't have to rely purely on economic theory to see how this plays out. We already have real-world data on what happens when borders are heavily reduced. The Schengen area in Europe operates as a model of passport-free travel. People move smoothly between developed economies without the system collapsing into chaos. The European Union goes even further, allowing freedom of movement for labor. Citizens of one sovereign member state can live and work in another without a visa. Historically, the United States operated with essentially no federal immigration restrictions, quotas, or screening agencies until the late 1800s. And decades before the EU, the Nordic Passport Union established a system of free movement between neighboring Northern European nations. But all of these successful examples share a critical variable. They occurred between regions with roughly comparable wealth, institutional strength, and political stability. Borders are not a binary switch. They are a permeability gradient that can be safely dialed down to nearly zero, but historically only between highly similar neighbors. The global thought experiment is entirely different. Humanity has never attempted to completely open borders between vastly asymmetrical systems all at once. Removing the barrier between deeply unequal income levels and legal systems doesn't create immediate balance. Much like a highly pressurized system rupturing into a total vacuum, it creates violent turbulence and immediate shock. The cosmopolitan tradition argues that your moral right to opportunity shouldn't depend on the sheer accident of where you are born. But there is a pragmatic argument that stable, bounded communities are exactly what make democratic self-governance and functioning welfare states possible in the first place. We are caught in a paradox. We want the doubled global GDP and the reunited families, but we fear the eroded tax bases and the overwhelmed infrastructure. Asking whether borders should exist or not is simply the wrong question. The future of civilization won't be determined by a dramatic, overnight abolition of the map. It will be determined by painstaking, incremental policy work, finding ways to capture the massive benefits of free movement without breaking the civic foundations that make those destinations desirable in the first place.